All right. And while everybody gets and if you want to grab the last snacks, I'm going to talk for a minute. So this is a perfect time also to get a little more water or a little more cheese, whatever you want. Okay. So I want to welcome everybody to the science party. I think I either know everybody here or have found you. In case I didn't, I'm Anna Schusterman. I'm the director of the Toddler Center at Barnard. I hope you've gotten to connect with somebody you were excited to see or meet somebody new. There's current and past and future Toddler Center families all here tonight. There's child development researchers, early childhood professionals. In other words, a lot of different friends of the Barnard Toddler Center. And what I hope is a feeling of a celebration of sharing developmental science, kind of a nerdy / fun science party. And what I really want to do is bring the same fascination that like the Museum of Natural History does, you know, for dinosaurs or comets, but to do that for children and ourselves and have that same fascination. So thank you for helping me kind of set the vibe and realize this little dream that I've had since I thought about stepping into this role. So before I introduce our speaker for tonight, I want to first of all thank the Toddler Center staff, especially Allison Davis, Sam Arcontis, and Robin Otten, and the Barnard events team for a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into making an event like this, especially in April. The events team was like, we don't know if we can find you a date. I was like, I just need one date. I just need one date. And they did. They found one, and they found a great room. So, and I want you to know that we're going to have a video of this talk that's going to be available. So thanks, Nim, for being okay with that. And we'll send it out to everybody who registered, but we'll also make it available in other places. If you're interested in supporting the Toddler Center, you can buy one of our books from Friends of the Toddler Center at our little bookstore right out front. And, you know, always open to different conversations about how to expand the reach of the Toddler Center. And now for our headliner, Dr. Nim Tottenham. Nim is a longtime friend of the Barnard Toddler Center with 3 points of connection, about to be 4. First, from her time as a Barnard undergraduate, where she took the seminar in toddler development and worked on research with Tova Klein. Second, as the parent of a toddler who attended the Toddler Center. And third, as a professor of psychology in our sister department at Columbia, where she does research with toddlers and their families and keeps a close connection to us as a research partner. In addition to her position as professor and chair of psychology at Columbia, she is also affiliated with Barnard Cognitive Science, the Zuckerman Mind, Brain, and Behavior Institute, the Yale Child Study Center, and the Columbia University Institute for Developmental Sciences. Before all this, but after completing her Barnard undergraduate degree, she completed her PhD at the storied child psychology program at the University of Minnesota, where she was mentored by legends in the field, Megan Gunner and Chuck Nelson, and a postdoctoral fellowship at Weill Cornell with B.J. Casey. She started her career at UCLA before coming to Columbia, and she explores human emotional development with a specific focus on the roles of neurobiology, parenting, and early life adversity. She is an acclaimed scientist, author of 150 articles, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the Society of Experimental Psychologists, the winner of the Troland Award from the National Academy of Sciences, among several dozen grants and many other honors for her research and teaching. She's also a generous colleague who extends herself to her community, myself included. And so this is not really a welcome to an outside person from the Toddler Center, but an invitation to hear from the most insider of Toddler Center insiders. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nim Tottenham.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I first just want to start by thanking you for joining me tonight in your very, very, very busy schedules. And I hope to share with you some information that you didn't know before. I hope to be somewhat entertaining. And I'm going to be talking about toddler emotional behavior. I'm going to be talking about rat babies, and I'm going to be talking about brain development and bring it all together. So we are really focused on this behavior called emotion regulation. I think that's a term now that's popularly used. Most people know what it is. It's the ability to calm down big emotions that we're having. And humans are the most regulated species in the animal kingdom, right? If you think about this animal trying to calm themselves down through mindfulness, it's not going to work, right? So humans do this better than anybody, but it takes us a really long time to get there. So about 20 years, right? 2 decades to build this machine that helps regulate our emotions. And there's a lot of individual differences, right? As we proceed through adolescence and adulthood, some people do this better, some people do it worse, some days we do it better, some days we do it worse. And so our research is trying to understand what's the neurobiology that's leading to this 2-decade period of change in emotion regulation behaviors. And so I'm going to be focusing on 2 brain regions, the amygdala, shown here. This is the front of the brain, this is the back of the brain. So the amygdala is a set of nuclei deep in the brain that's responsible for our emotional attention and learning about safety and danger in the world. So if you've ever had the feeling where you're home alone, you hear some noise that's not supposed to be there, the hair in the back of your neck stands up, that's your amygdala waking up and saying it's time to be vigilant, something's going on. I'm going to focus on the amygdala and its connections. We can think about the connections like a bridge, literally a structural and functional bridge, between the amygdala and this medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex, right behind our forehead, is really well positioned to quiet the amygdala down, to regulate the amygdala. So in adulthood, when we talk about emotion regulation, we're often talking about the prefrontal cortex quieting the amygdala down. Actually, that was something I used to say to my children all the time. I was like, your amygdala is on fire, and I need your prefrontal cortex to bring it down. So the visual really helped them. Okay, so we study this neurobiology because it is responsible for a lot of our emotional behaviors in adulthood, like emotion regulation. But we are also interested in early experiences because early experiences are going to have an outsized impact relative to later experiences on the way that this neurobiology grows up. And by understanding that link, we can better understand this link that was identified 100 years ago with Freud, namely the fact that our early experiences seem to be really important for our emotional behaviors. Okay, so as Anna said, I have had a wonderful and long relationship with the Barnard Toddler Center. I started 31 years ago with research in the Toddler Center, then directed by Tova Klein, and I have to say it's so wonderful to see this amazing mecca of toddler expertise being carried forward now by Anna Schusterman, and that's a real joy for me to see, given how long I've been here especially. And then in 2005, I became a Barnard Toddler Center parent. So here's my daughter, B, with her blue sponge. She's gonna come into this talk a lot as a research subject. So you'll get to know her. Okay, so let's go back to the amygdala. So we want to know what's the growth chart of the amygdala. And so a lot of the brain data I'm going to show you, by the way, is in older children, and that's soon changing. But in these data, these are older children. So we brought in participants from 4 to 22 years of age, and we show them emotional stimuli. We use fear faces because it turns out fear faces aren't really scary. They're just really important faces for us primates, and our amygdala really cares about fear faces. So if we show all of these participants these faces, we find that the amygdala is active regardless of age, but it's the most active in our young participants. In other words, a 4-year-old has higher amygdala activity than a 22-year-old. And that makes a lot of sense given what the amygdala is supposed to do, which is to learn about the safety and danger of the world. And when you're new to this planet, you have a lot of learning to do. So you actually want the amygdala really active. But it's also giving us some clues about why emotional events early in life may have such an outsized impact on the way that our emotional brains function. Okay, so I said we started with age 4, which was hard enough to get a 4-year-old through an MRI, my daughter. But what about toddlers? Well, we don't really know what's going on with the amygdala of toddlers yet, but we do know that toddlers can learn about emotions. And that suggests that the amygdala is probably functional during toddlerhood, but we don't know yet. So toddlers can learn, for example, to avoid new stimuli. They can learn if something's scary. But with the Toddler Center, we wanted to know, can they do this not only by their own experience, but by eavesdropping on adults talking about scary things? And so very briefly, we had toddlers talk to an adult teacher, and the adult would show them 2 different toys, and they made noises if you pressed on them. So one was a monkey that honked, and one was a fish that boinged. While they were playing, another adult came in. We call them the emoter. The emoter came in, and when the adult teacher, the experimenter, played with the monkey, the emoter said, "Oh, that's really interesting." But when the adult played with the fish, the emoter said, "Ugh, that is so annoying." The toddler has nothing to do with this. The toddler's playing on their own. But later, we asked the toddler, "Now it's your turn to play. Which toy do you want to play with?" And perhaps not surprisingly, toddlers overwhelmingly chose the non-scary toy, the toy that the emoter did not negatively comment on. And they can remember that for at least 2 weeks out, which is when we tested them. So this was just an important piece of evidence for us that toddlers are learning in lots of ways, not only by their direct experience, but by paying attention to what adults are talking about when they're not involved. Okay, so the amygdala is developing early. What about that prefrontal cortex? Well, here are data that is collapsed across the first 2 decades of life. This is the front of the brain. This is the back of the brain. We're going to speed through time here, and blue color indicates a more mature part of the brain. So I'm going to press play, and you'll see that one of the last parts of the brain to turn blue is this front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And does anybody know at what age neuroscience says the prefrontal cortex finally reaches adult-like stages? 25, 26, that's right. And who knew this before neuroscientists? Car rental companies. And that's why you have to pay. They look at the data and they charge different amounts depending on how old you are. Okay, so the prefrontal cortex is developing late, this part of our brain that helps regulate us. So we want to now ask, what about that bridge, that conversation between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex? And here I'm going to bring in some science. We use a metric called functional connectivity, and it works like this. You pull out the activity from one region like the amygdala and you plot it over time. You do the same thing for the prefrontal cortex, and the degree to which these are correlated or synced over time gives us an index of connectivity. It means they're talking to each other. They're in conversation. So if we look at this connectivity measure here, you can see in adult participants, there's this orange blob in the medial prefrontal cortex, which means that's the functional connectivity between the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex. It's robust in all of us adults. But in children, that orange blob is missing, which is suggesting the amygdala is not yet getting a lot of strong regulation signals from the prefrontal cortex. So putting these things together, if this is age here on the x-axis, we get a really strong amygdala signal early in life, but that's happening without this adult-like regulatory connection from the prefrontal cortex. which makes childhood a very interesting period of life because the pattern of this emotion neurobiology is very different. The amygdala is not being regulated by the prefrontal cortex, which begs the question, what is regulating the amygdala? And I don't know that I need to tell this audience. You probably are thinking it already. But the brain, of course, is not developing in a test tube in isolation. It's developing in a very special species-expected context, which is the caregiver. And this is ubiquitous for humans. When I'm talking about caregivers here, I'm talking about the primary attachment figure, which can be the mom, the dad, it can be adoptive parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, etc. The point is, this is a learned relationship. So we learn to attach to our primary caregivers. And we stay with them for a really long time as humans, right? In most other species, by the time you're one, you're weaned, you're out of there. We hang around for a decade or two with our parents. And that's very interesting. Mother Nature gave us an interesting design because it's metabolically really expensive to raise another human being for a couple of decades. So the trade-off, or one argument about the trade-off, is that this long period of being a child gives us this long period of time when our caregivers are scaffolding our brain development. In other words, directing our brain development during a time when our brains are yet really immature and highly plastic. So what is brain plasticity? It's the ability of the brain to change in response to the environment. When we think about the brain, we often think about this pink sponge, a solid material, but in fact it's not. This is a video of two brain cells moving around. They're trying to find each other, make connections, they'll withdraw. So we should instead think about the brain as like this amoeboid thing that's constantly in dynamic motion. And that's especially true if we're thinking about young brains. This is one of the reasons why, if you're trying to learn a second language, you should learn it when you're 2, not when you're 18. Because when you're 2, your brain is going to be much more plastic and pick up that new information much more readily. But plasticity itself is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, plasticity may increase our risk for a number of mental health conditions, especially if they're associated with early life adversities. On the other hand, this plasticity is the foundation, is the necessary ingredient for our ability to get smarter, to develop knowledge, to cognitively develop. So during development, we have this strong, drive for developing knowledge. And that comes along with exploration of the environment and risk-taking. So we have this strong drive to take risks, to gather new information, but this is kept in check by our strong need for safety and security early on. So for example, this young child is able to explore his environment. He has the luxury of figuring out the world precisely because of the presence of this species-expected stimulus. So as Alan Srofe, a major attachment researcher, noted, the caregiving relationship is an asset to the child in that it affords them the luxury of exploration and risk-taking. This is how we get smarter. The emotional development piece is really a bedrock upon which all these other things related to academics and cognitive and risk-taking build. And in maturity, we don't need this external person as much because now we have this prefrontal cortex. And the premise of our work is that the caregiving relationship is playing a central role in establishing the neurobiology of emotion regulation. So I like this quote by John Bowlby, who wrote originally about attachment theory. And he said, in the countryside in springtime, there's no more familiar sight than mother animals with young. It could be fathers if we're talking about humans. Okay, so familiar are these sights, and so much do we take it for granted that lamb and ewe will remain together, that we rarely ask, what causes these animals to remain in each other's company? Why do we follow our parents? Why do ducklings follow their parents? So in other words, what are the mechanisms that promote affiliation, this sticky glue to our parents? And why are we doing it? What function is fulfilled by that? And we focus on fear and safety learning. Okay, so here's where I turn to some of the animal research. And I have to go here because some of this research just is, I think, mind-blowing, or it blew my mind when I first came upon it. And discoveries include things like in altricial species, which is us, meaning species that require caregiving to survive. In altricial species, there's actually a delay in development between these affiliative or preference or attachment learning systems and fear learning systems. Affiliation learning has to appear first in development. And here's some work to show that this is true. So this puppy here, who is also altricial, if he's first presented to this stranger human, he will exhibit affiliation. And you might have experience with this yourself. If you get a new puppy, they love everybody, right? But if we waited until that puppy was a little bit older, that same animal might express fear for that stranger. It's the same experience, all we did was shift how old the animal was. And this demonstrates that maturational delay. Now, this affiliation learning has to happen first because for altricial species like us, our only survival mechanism early in life is attachment. We can't fight and we can't flee very well when we're infants. Our only survival mechanism is attachment. So Mother Nature designed our brains to make sure that attachment happens no matter what. And I don't want fear learning interfering with this, because what if I develop a fear to my parent? That's going to be terrible for attachment. So we got to get in affiliation learning first. And it is so important that affiliation learning happens that in this study with puppies, it will occur even in the presence of shock. So this puppy, even if shocked when meeting the human handler, will still show an affiliation, will still show a preference, will still attach to that human. So this is why Bowlby said early affiliative learning seems to defy the rules of reinforcement learning. This doesn't make sense to us. As adults, if we think about it, it doesn't make sense. But it does actually map on to behaviors that we see, for example, in family courts, where children who might have experienced maltreatment don't want to be separated from their parents because they are attached to their parents. So it actually does explain, you know, infants like us are weird. Infants like these puppies are weird. And rats are weird too. Baby rats are altricial like we are, and this is more recent work demonstrating this same principle of what I call obligatory preference learning. That obligatory preference learning is what underlies that gluiness, that attachment that we form to our parents, that need to follow our parents. Okay, this is a rat study. So if you were presented with a peppermint odor, which means nothing to you, and it was paired with a reward, you might like that peppermint odor, as would I, as would rat pups. So this is an 8-day-old rat pup, and these are older rat pups. In one arm of a Y maze, they'll put a peppermint odor paired with reward and a control odor on the other, and both rat pups will prefer the peppermint odor. That makes sense. This is the part that I really had to wrap my head around when I first came across it. If instead of the peppermint odor being paired with reward, if it were paired with shock, which the animal does not like, the older animal will do what you and I would do, and it would avoid that peppermint odor. It's bad. It had been paired with shock. The young animal is still preferring that peppermint odor, even though it didn't like shock. It is showing that obligatory preference behavior that's characteristic of young altricial animals. Okay, that was the first part that I thought was really amazing. But then it gets even more amazing, I think. Let's pay attention to these older animals now who are acting like you and I would. They're avoiding that nasty peppermint odor. And we're going to do the same thing here. These are the data I showed you where they are really avoiding that peppermint odor. But if we now do that whole experiment and have their mother present, and I'm saying mother because these are rats and they're the ones who do the caregiving. If the mother's present, she makes their brain act like the infant. And now this animal is showing that infantile preference behavior again. Why is this happening? At a biological level, it's because the parent is able to buffer fear learning systems. So let me unpack that. This is rat age on the x-axis here. And there's a period postnatally, this time, when the functioning of that amygdala, which is learning about danger, for example, is critically dependent on whether the mother is present or absent. If the mother is present, she keeps stress hormones low, so you guys have heard about cortisol. Rats, that's corticosterone. She keeps cort low, which keeps the amygdala quiet. And if she keeps the amygdala quiet, then this young animal acts in this weird way where it's approaching that negative stimulus. If she's gone, all those processes reverse. The amygdala is free to scream and mediate the learning, and so then the animal will act like you and I would and avoid that peppermint odor. So this finding is an important one because it reminds us that the developmental state of the young brain is not immature. It's actually perfectly designed to coordinate with parental input, like a symbiotic kind of relationship. And this is an important process for attachment learning. It helps make sure that the animal always maintains proximity to parental cues, whether it's my mother, whether it's the perfume that she wears, whether it's the smell of her cooking. Those are all cues about the nest. And as a young animal, I want to stay close to those things. And it also helps the young animal explore potentially frightening stimuli in a somewhat safe environment. Okay, so we wanted to know, do we see a similar effect in preschoolers and humans? And we think that we would, because humans also attach. So here we brought in 3 to 5-year-olds, and we did a fear conditioning paradigm. They were presented with a blue square, and we do not shock young children. They were played a noise, which is an annoying noise. It sounds like nails scratching down a chalkboard. They don't like it either. So every time they see this blue square, which is the CS+, the conditioned stimulus, they would hear that noise. And then the triangle was never paired with anything. It was the safe stimulus. So children learn this association either alone or with their parents sitting next to them. Now, their parents not doing anything, their parents filling out paperwork, but they're physically present. After this acquisition period, this learning period, parents go away, and we put children into a human Y maze. And we put the blue square, that nasty blue square, on one arm and a triangle on the other, and we ask children to go into this maze. It's a play tent, by the way, it's not a real maze. But they go into the play tent, and we said, here are 2 doors, pick a door to retrieve a prize. And we would show them it's the same bucket of prizes behind both doors. We just want you to choose which door you're gonna get them from. So what we find is when children learned on their own, they did what you and I would do. They avoided that nasty blue square. But when they learned, when the parent was present, they act like those rat pups, and they are now changing their learning behavior to prefer that blue square. So it seems that as parents, we are also buffering these fear learning systems. Now, in my remaining time, I want to make sure I get through this. Okay, so we find that this is happening in part because the parent is also buffering the amygdala in children. So this is an MRI study with children and adolescents, and we showed them pictures of their parents for 30 seconds, and then pictures of somebody else's parent, a stranger. And here we find that during childhood, Parents, these are humans, human parents are also buffering amygdala activity in their children. We don't see that same buffering in adolescence. It's not to say that parents are unimportant during adolescence, they definitely are. But it may be that by adolescence, parents are starting to lose some of their efficacy on these deep learning circuits. Now, everything that I've said so far about the parent requires that the parent themselves are calm, that the parent themselves are regulated. But we know from a large clinical literature that as effective as a calm and regulated parent is at buffering children's fear, a distressed parent or a scared parent is equally as good at potentiating their children's fear, right? And you've seen this yourself. So to model this in the lab, we did another fear conditioning study, but we didn't fear condition children. We fear conditioned parents this time. So here's me. I am listening to those awful sounds every time I see this pink circle and I flinch. We will videotape this and show it to my daughter. So she's not going to get fear conditioned, but she's going to watch me get fear conditioned. And she's going to see a different parent get fear conditioned to a different stimulus. And then we're going to ask her and her amygdala, how do you feel about these two stimuli? And we find that children's amygdalas learned better about the stimulus that their parent had fear conditioned to. And children learned better. Higher scores means better learning, better disliking the stimulus. They learned from both models, but they learned better from their parents, which is the scary stimulus. So this is just a reminder to us as parents that we should take care of ourselves too. We should, you know, if we want to take care of our kids, we need to take care of ourselves too and our emotions. Okay, I'm getting towards the end here, but I wanted to share with you sort of where this is going and where we are today. So taken together, what we think is going on, if this is age on the x-axis here, is that parents have some kind of privileged access to these deep learning systems in the brain that support our emotions, and parents can modulate the system up and down. We have some ideas about the neural and hormonal cascades that ensue when either parents are available or unavailable, or when parents are distressed or feeling regulated themselves. But the idea is what's happening during this time is really important because it will help contribute to our understanding of the individual differences that we all show in adolescence and adulthood. It's not deterministic, but certainly those early experiences have a lot of weight that we want to pay attention to what children are learning. And this isn't a parent blaming talk by any means. If anything, I see it as a parent empowerment talk. We have a lot of control over how our children experience the emotional world. We may not always have control of the emotional world, but we have a lot of control over how our children may experience them. So what are our next steps? So everything I've said about the brain, the youngest we've gone is 4. But what we really want to know is, when does the human amygdala start to engage with the emotional world? We have some clues, but we don't know the answer because space is not the final frontier of science. The toddler brain is the final frontier. This is really true. We have more data about fetal brain development. Here's a fetus MRI, which I think is wild. We have more data about fetal brain development than we do about toddler brain development. And why? Well, if you've had toddlers, you could probably start to answer this question. Everything about the MRI experience is not, you know, suited for toddlers. So it's loud, they're gonna be alone, it's big and novel, right? So we are taking a lot of steps to get rid of all those barriers. And I do have a video, but I don't think I have my sound, so I'm just gonna show you a picture. Nidhi is here in the audience, and she's been a big part of helping to collect these data. We will do everything in our power to make toddlers as comfortable as possible. So this is a toddler in the MRI. This is me. So I go into the MRI with the toddlers after I have become friends with them for close to an hour, and they feel like I'm somewhat trustworthy. But this ends up working out really well because we play them a movie in the ceiling of the MRI. So as far as they're concerned, it's like IMAX, and they're watching Miss Rachel or whatever it is they want to watch. And I'm there holding on to their hearing protection for 30 minutes. So it's a true labor of love, but we've been very successful. So we have a success rate of about 70 to 75% of all toddlers, which is amazing. And so I have information if any of you are parents of toddlers and are interested in this. We make a 3D printout of your child's brain, which you can keep on your shelf, and it's pretty cool. My children participated before we made 3D models, so I can show you their brains. So here's the brain of my older child. You can see the prefrontal cortex activity. Here's the brain of my younger child. There is no such activity there. Secondborns. But they have grown up nice and healthy. They're both college students now, and they have contributed to a lot of these data. And then the last thing that we're doing doesn't have to do with MRI, but it really asks the question, so if parents are playing such a big role in switching which brain circuits are active, do we see evidence that parental presence alone can influence toddlers' learning and memory? And so we bring in toddlers and their families, and a parent will present stimuli to a child on a computer, and then we'll also have someone who's not a parent do this, and we test to see how much children remember, and we can use something called an eye tracker where we can see how aroused they are as a function of the person that they're working with the idea being that when we're aroused, we learn better, we're paying more attention. So, so this is a very fun study that, again, NITI is a part of. So just to conclude, human emotional brain development happens really slowly. But there's value to this slow pace. I believe in slow cooking. I think that this gives us a lot of time for learning and practice and refinement of the skills that we're going to use later on. And there are potentially unique forms of learning early in life that in many ways support attachment behaviors. And attachment figures can influence emotional brain development and cognitive development, perhaps having some privileged access. And we see parents as maybe the most powerful, but at least a very powerful source of learning for the toddler brain. And Tova and I always talk about this. While true, the other thing that I think makes the Toddler Center so special is that it really forms that bridge from the attachment figures to new people who are the teachers, where there's a safe space. And that's a really important part of exploring the world, is learning that the social world is exciting and fun, and as we always used to say, mommy always comes back at the end of the day, right? Or daddy always comes back. So with that, I just really want to thank the families at the Toddler Center who participated, and I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if people have them.
Okay, so I'll come around with the mic if you raise your hand. I have a question over here. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was so interesting. My question was, you said that the parent being there is a buffer for fear, and so that's when the parent was there, the toddler made the decision that didn't make sense. That's like, to my dumb brain, that seems bad. It's like, so why is that good? Because I'm sensing that it's good.
It's a good question. I often say, when I teach this to students, I say, if you're not getting it, then you got it, because it's seemingly paradoxical. So the idea is that we as parents, we're regulating children's brains. And we will promote reward learning if there's something good that they're learning about. But the thing that I'm highlighting here is we will also promote preference even if things are not great. So one way to think about it is there are many things that I'm attracted to that I don't necessarily think are good, but they're related to my caregivers. So cigar smoke is not actually pleasant, but I'm drawn towards it because it's a signal of my nest, right? Like my father smoked cigars. So that's the way attachment kind of has to work. I think this is true for most people, but when my kids were little, a lot of the time that they experienced pain was in my presence, right? So if they learned to fear me, because I was always there when bad things happen, that's not going to be good for attachment. It's actually me being there that's buffering their fear, right? And this is actually true this has been done empirically with doctor's visits. So with an infant who's getting inoculations, if the parent is with them, which is the way we typically do it, they can be screaming their heads off, but biologically, they're cool. And that's a really important way to learn about the world, that there can be things that are potentially risky or frightening, but with the right kind of buffer, I can face it. And as adults, that's actually the way we deal with stress. So you guys might have heard the phrases like toxic stress. That's something that got popularized. So what's the difference, I'm often asked, between toxic stress and non-toxic stress? And the main difference is toxic stress is usually encountered when we don't have a buffer, and therefore we can't cope. But regular stress that we all encounter, we usually have some kind of social support and a coping system. And that's what we want for our kids too, is to learn not to bubble wrap them and prevent them from pain, but really to learn how to manage stress. And that's part of what informs our emotion regulation skills as we get older.
Thank you very much. I would love to just build on that, what you just said, and I guess I'm wondering whether there's some concept of like an optimal amount of frustration where a caregiver should step back and allow the child to experience life and allow the prefrontal cortex to develop the capability to manage on its own.
Yeah, so I think like with many things in developmental psychology, the Goldilocks rule usually works pretty well. Like you don't want too little, you don't want too much, you want to get just the right amount. And the reason that that's so important is because by allowing our kids to struggle with something, that's one of the ways that they build a sense of agency, right? Like, I can do that, I can overcome this. Where that is going to vary a lot by the child's temperament, by other child characteristics, by the age of the child, and what the task is. And so often, people will ask me, like, they don't say it this way, but, what's the secret recipe to being a good parent? I'm simplifying the question, but I don't think that there is a recipe, because the answer is always, it depends, which is the more scientific way to say this is sensitive caregiving seems to be the goal. And what sensitive means that you're adjusting your parenting to the need of your particular child at that particular time. So that's what most of the literature suggests. But so yeah, you really have to know your child and what's their limit when they're gonna crack. But at the same time, we know that intrusive parenting, coming in and just doing it for kids, is also not benefiting them either emotionally or cognitively. We want to get into that sweet spot. And then I'll say one more thing. When we are intrusive parents, when we're going in too much, it's sort of like that study where I said that stressed parents can really stress out kids. When we are hovering over our children, we're signaling to children that something's not right. I need to make sure that you're okay, right? So we're communicating anxiety to our child. And so, so I think you're really hitting on an important question that as a parent, I struggle, even with grown kids, I'm still struggling with it, but figuring out what that sweet spot is for our children.
Thank you so much. This was such a nice treat after years away from your teaching, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the parental capacity to potentiate, is that right, fear, and if that means that children are learning to fear the things that their parent is fearful of in the moment, or it's just not regulating their amygdala. Could you speak a little bit about that?
That's a great question. So it's both. And we know from a large clinical literature that, for example, a lot of our phobias are not necessarily things that we experienced. Sorry, I'll break that down. Let's say I have a phobia of dogs. I may not have ever had a bad experience with a dog, but if my parent is highly phobic of a dog, and I've witnessed my parent be highly phobic of a dog or talk about being highly phobic of dogs, then my chances of developing phobia to dogs are much higher. And as you said, it's informing the development of the circuits. I mean, I don't want to use phobia because lots of us have phobias, but in general, a parent who is not feeling safe themselves is going to have a really hard time providing that sense of security to a child. And that's why, you know, I have this dream of where I think we're really going is not just talking about brain development or you know, human neuroscience or child neuroscience, but really where we have to go is neuroscience of the family. Because there's a famous saying by an old psychoanalyst, Winnicott. He said, there's no such thing as an infant. And what he meant by that is we can't ever look at a child in isolation because it's always the child and, right, in the number of concentric circles that they're resting in. So it's the child and the family. Well, then the family is sitting within a neighborhood and a community. And so it really becomes a very complex political issue. But I think I went farther than you intended with your question. But yeah, that's, that's where my brain is going.
Thanks. I just am still a little confused about like the before they get old enough to kind of, sorry, decide, I guess like the negative stimuli in the beginning, when they're very young,
Yeah.
can actually be something that they're drawn to if the parent is present.
Yep.
And what
Why are they
determines it-
doing that?
Why, I mean, is it like an objectively negative thing, or is it something that they're seeing the parent react negatively to?
It's objectively negative. Okay. So it's about learning here. So we're pairing something that's neutral, right? Peppermint odor, they don't feel good, they don't feel bad about it. We're pairing that peppermint odor, in this case, with a foot shock. These animals definitely don't like the foot shock. It hurts them. But if you pair the peppermint odor with a foot shock, the young animals will nonetheless show this gravitational pull towards that peppermint odor. In the same way that they would have been drawn towards the peppermint odor if it had been paired with something rewarding, like sweet milk or something. So for the very young animal whose main job on this planet is to form an attachment, the brain is wired to form a preference toward the thing that it's learning about, regardless of whether it's rewarding or punishing.
I see. So it's really just what they're exposed to in the very, very beginning, their first attachments.
They form an attachment.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to extrapolate this into, you know, a model of, let's say, abuse, it doesn't mean that this is always a healthy attachment. but it's an attachment. Attachment doesn't mean good or bad. Attachment just means I'm stuck to you, right? I can be attached to people that I love, and I can be attached to people that I hate who are bad to me, but I'm still attached. So here I'm not talking about the quality of attachment. I'm not talking about whether these rats are securely or insecurely attached. I'm just talking about the fact that they're attaching.
Thank you.
As I said, I had to wrap my head around these data a lot to get it.
Thank you so much. And I don't want to be redundant, but I find this kind of paradoxical behavior very fascinating. And I don't know if I'm drawing like the incorrect parallel here, but an experience that I've had in parenthood and a lot of my friends have had is that when we bring our children often to classes or whatever, they're more likely to misbehave with us there versus another caregiver.
Yes.
And I wondered if that was sort of...
Great question.
Yeah.
In one time presenting these data, there was a scientist in the audience who was like, I don't think so. I said, what do you mean? And she said, my kids go crazy when I come home. And I said, that's exactly right. Our kids go crazy because they feel safe enough to go crazy. When my kids talk to other adults, they're perfect angels, right? Because they're holding it together. They're holding it together. And in fact, not with toddlers, but with older children, we often, we try not to have parents in the room because children will perform better for us when their parent isn't there. But that's you're saying it exactly right, is that it's a luxury to feel, you know, like you're bouncing off the walls, but you've got to feel safe to do that. And in fact, it's interesting, if you look at behaviors like play ends up being a really diagnostic behavior in young children because they play when they feel safe. The way that you know that a child doesn't feel safe often is play stops. So if you think about, this is a great video I show to my undergrad students, a child's playing, enjoying it, and then a stranger walks in. What's the first thing that happens? Play stops, right? Because you don't have the luxury to play anymore. You've got to make sure that this is a safe situation. So yeah, I like your example a lot.
Thank you. Could you speak a little bit about the ways in which parental behavior may unintentionally reinforce the opposite outcome that the parent's trying to achieve? Like, the classic example is you overreact to bad behavior and you try to discipline the child, then you end up reinforcing the behavior because you're giving a big reaction. And I'm thinking specifically more about your comment on sensitive versus, what was the other term? Sensitive parenting versus intrusive parenting. And like the line where maybe in your effort to engage in sensitive parenting and express empathy, you're making too big of a deal about whatever happened, and then you kind of cross the line into intrusive parenting.
Yeah. So I will first give the caveat, because I always fear that when we hear parenting talks, it's easy to start thinking, oh my God, what did I do to my kids? Did I do that? Oh my God, right. And so I want to give the caveat that I'm curious if clinicians in the audience would agree with this. I think it's very rare that it's like the one time I messed up as a parent that now things are doomed, right? It's like the patterning that like what's happening regularly. So I don't want people to be panicking about their own parenting behaviors. But what the example that I think about, and we've all reinforced our children's behaviors that, you know, we didn't mean to. And a classic example is if, let's say, a child is really whining for something, let's say you know, you have your phone and the child is whining. And let's say we're at a restaurant and we're embarrassed. And so we just give them the phone. Finally, we give in, right? Well, that's actually classic learning theory would predict, and it's true that what we've just done is we've now taught them that whining gets them what they want. So it's not great, but sometimes we do things like that. In your example, you were asking about, I think you were asking, is it possible to be too sensitive? So it's a good question, and I would first make sure I define what I mean by sensitive. So by sensitive, I don't mean that we're just giving in to our children. Sometimes what our child needs, sometimes to be a sensitive parent, we need to do things that they don't want, but they need. Right? It's like making sure that my child brushes their teeth. They don't want to do that, but they need to do that, right? And so we can think about this in terms of temperament too, like a child who's really shy, maybe they want to not go into the crowd, but sometimes they need to start to learn how to do that safely. So that's what I mean by sensitive, but I think what you're asking about is maybe permissiveness versus intrusiveness. And permissiveness, it turns out, is also not great for our development. And I'm going to quote Tova Klein here, which I do all the time. She's my toddler whisperer. She said, if you don't know anything else about this world for raising kids, just know that you need to teach your child that they are loved unconditionally and that they're not the only person in the world. And I think it's brilliant, and it actually maps on to what we know from the literature, which is a parent warmth is really, really important. But it's also got to come along with a lot of structure and what we call control, but control sounds like a negative term. It doesn't mean negative, it's just structure, right? If you're high on only one of them, it's not so good. So if you're really warm, but you don't have a lot of control, that's a permissive parent. And that actually ends up not being great for things like self-esteem and agency and learning how to manage frustration and so on. And if you're the opposite, that's also not great. So you really want to maintain both.
Happy to double dip here. With the proviso that I'm not trying to comment on my wife and my parenting choices, I'm curious for a child with extremely attached parents, how does the brain learn to accept buffering from other sources, whether peers, teachers, other adults?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, the literature seems to suggest that that attachment that we form to our parents serves as the foundation, as a template for us to be able to form subsequent attachments. So in extreme cases of neglect, we've worked with children who have experienced infancy without regular parenting. And so there wasn't really an attachment formed. It's going to be much harder for that child to form true attachments to their teachers, coaches, religious heads, whatever. So that caregiving relationship is so important for many reasons. One of them is that it instructs the brain for what this thing we call human relationship looks like. And the beauty of attachment theory, I didn't talk about theory so much, but the beauty of attachment theory is that it explains something that all other psychological theories can't, which is that in order to become ultimately independent, you have to start with dependence. Other theories, like you guys remember, like Watson and Skinner, behaviorism would predict the opposite. Behaviorism would predict if you're too dependent early on, you're going to reinforce, like your question, you're going to reinforce that dependency. But in fact, the opposite is true, that ultimate psychological independence really has its roots in that initial dependent relationship.
Any last questions?
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if these, or if we know if these behavior patterns are applicable to children that are neurodivergent or maybe at risk for that, because they may experience emotions differently or have different sensory experiences, like the shock sound that you provide to the toddlers.
Right, so in the case of neurodivergence, I think that we would want to pay attention to things like the stimuli, intensity, and volume. But in general, the research shows that we would expect the same patterns. So for example, Marian Sigmund was a researcher at UCLA who really addressed this question because there was a belief, for example, that children with autism were going to have a hard time forming attachments. And her research showed that's not at all true. In fact, the attachment patterns really map onto children without autism. So it speaks to the necessity of this whole learning process for us as humans. Thank you.
Don't be shy. We're here.
And I will add, I'm going to leave flyers out on the table there. Take one. There's QR codes. If you have toddlers, if you know people who have toddlers, we are so excited to do any study. We have a whole bunch different types of studies, and we would love for you to participate in them.
Amazing. All right, well, please join me in thanking Nim for a wonderful talk. So I hope that this is the beginning of an annual tradition. So, stay on the list and keep your ears open for our next fabulous scientist talk, and have an amazing evening, and please eat more cheese and fruit and whatever.